Yeah, look, a lot of people, when they talk about good vision, I think what they really mean is good sight. And so the words vision and sight are used interchangeably, but we tend to look at vision being the whole thing that you do with your vision, what the brain is using to understand the world around you. And whereas sight is more just what we can measure from the bottom line on the chart. And it's such a small part of the overall visual process that it's so easy to overlook how people can run into trouble when their vision's not working well, despite maybe passing, the bottom line of the chart, being able to see 20/20 or 6/6, as we say in Australia.
Mm. And so, like, I think a lot of people, when they think about eye tests or eye exams, they do think about the eye chart, reading the letters. But as I work with more optometrists, and I learn that there's a whole lot more that goes into that. And in fact, you can even distinguish between like comprehensive eye exams for adults and comprehensive eye exams for kids. I think there's maybe some different approaches in there. But anyway, could you tell us a little more about, like, when you do a comprehensive eye exam for children, like what are some of the things that you're checking for?
Yeah, look, and as much as we want to pay broader attention to the whole visual process, and I don't want to ignore sight, as it's still an important factor, but like I said, it's a very small part. So we do measure things like sight and what prescription is, and making sure that your eyes look healthy. But what we want to look at, particularly with kids, and this does extend into adults because they were once kids and they carry a lifetime of vision problems sometimes without realizing it. Um, and so a good part of what we're wanting to assess is, how does this person use their eyes to learn, to move, to interact with the environment? And so we're looking at things like eye movements. How well can they move their eyes free of their head and their body? That's an important part actually in sight. In order to be able to look at fine detail, you need to be able to move your eyes accurately. So eye movement measurements are a very important part that we want to look at with kids, and it's a standard part of our exam.
Mm.
The next phase is, how well do you keep the two eyes working together? We've obviously got two eyes, but we only see one thing, and that's a very complex process of the brain integrating the information together. And that's a learnt process that we develop, and we want to make sure that we understand how well that's developing over time. And when we get into school age, there's a lot of pressure on the visual system, and that interaction between the two eyes and how we keep things clear can be thrown out. And so we really want to, again, make sure that we're comprehensively measuring that, because, again, that's something that may not be picked up by being able to read the bottom line on a chart that's out in the distance.
Right. So as a parent myself with school age kids, I understand it's like really important that your children, um, can see, can use their eyes well while they're at school. So can you talk about, like, some of the stresses, and like some of the activities that kids really need to have good vision for? Like, I've read somewhere that between 70 or 80% of the learning input that kids receive at school is actually through their eyes. So it's obviously a very important sensory
Yeah,
channel for them.
they actually did a study in Brisbane, and the stats were something like 70% of a child's day is spent in a highly visually demanding environment. So even if the activity that they're doing is not specifically considered visual, it still involves a fairly high visual demand. And the other 30% is lunchtime. So pretty much the entire time they're in class, they've got high visual demand. So you've got lighting, you've got devices, and even just near work. I mean, we talk about digital eye strain affecting 80–90% of adults now. Well, back when I was at school and devices were, I think I was the only kid with a computer, thanks to my father. But, the computers were highly unusual, and eye strain was something that was still around, but it was more if you did a lot of reading and a lot of writing and those sorts of things. Whereas, even someone who's not a reader is still connected to a device. And so that high near visual demand, I mean, basically you've got lots of two-dimensional surfaces up close,
Mm.
sitting still, with a human visual system that's designed for moving through a solid 3D space.
mm,
And so we've got to expect that if we do that for hours on end, that things are going to change, particularly with a visual system that's still developing. And so
mm,
a lot of that near-based tasks are what are quite demanding.
mm,
And, and learning at the same time. So there's a big demand on the cognitive process of vision while they're also using other cognitive skills. And so
mm.
there's a lot of energy being burnt there.
And so we started off by saying that that there's more to vision than just clear eyesight, and I believe that like a lot of schools they do actually do like sight screening. Um, so, but do you feel that like most educators and even parents for that matter know how to pick up the signs that a kid may have some maybe in need of some vision therapy? Like, do you think educators are fully aware of the symptoms and the indications that kids may be having some visual issues?
Yeah, probably not enough. And look, site screenings certainly have a place. What they're designed to do, if we understand what they're designed to do, and therefore we can understand what they don't do, they're designed to pick up the 3 to 5% of children who might have what we call a lazy eye or an
Mm,
eye turn or a big difference in the prescription between the two eyes. So you can have one eye that's not seeing well without a person outwardly showing any signs or symptoms, or as a child, certainly not being aware of it themselves. And that's only just a small part of the population. And they're very important things to pick up early. But again, it's for the 5% that it applies to. Um, Whereas a lot of the vision problems that impact people who have more normal, just 20/20 in each eye, it's really easy to overlook the symptoms. And I just don't think that a lot of people are aware of it. I don't know how much it's part of educators' training anymore. You certainly get some teachers who become aware of it as part of their experience. And certainly, again, it goes back to the whole all we talk about is sight, and that's what's in people's minds. So there needs to be a lot more discussion around the kind of symptoms for sure.
mm,
That might indicate that someone's not seeing as well as they could, or using their visual
mm,
system as well as they could for learning.
mm. So what would be some red flags to look out for then if you're a teacher
Yeah,
or
look,
something?
I like to look at two brackets of symptoms. And so a lot of the time when I'm talking to parents and teachers is that we have what we call eye-related symptoms. We have what we call performance-related symptoms. And so your eye-related symptoms are ones where we might all agree fairly easily, that kind of sounds like a vision problem. And so they might complain of blur, they might complain of double vision. They're talked about a lot, but I actually find they're quite rare. We're talking about headaches, particularly middle of the day, end of the day, eye rubbing, complaints of sore eyes, watery eyes, getting close to the page. They're all things that might seem, where we could quickly make the connection that it might be a vision or an eye related problem. Probably the ones that really get overlooked are falling into that performance category where someone might avoid reading, they might lose interest, they might say it's boring, they might find that they can do the first paragraph or even the first page, and then the performance seems to drop off. Or you get someone who is sailing along well all of a sudden, and then quite rapidly starts to kind of plateau and sort of peter out in their enthusiasm. And they can be blamed on lots of things: attention, laziness, even. Unfortunately, that still gets bandied around occasionally.
Mm,
And even just interest. Oh, it's just not their thing. And
mm,
it's interesting to sometimes test an adult, and the kind of workups I do on kids, I do on adults because they carry their problems from childhood. And I'll sometimes say to a parent or an adult that I've got in the chair and say, you were never a reader. And they go, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I can tell from the way that you use your eyes that you would find reading uncomfortable and difficult and would lose concentration, and therefore you won't enjoy it. And why push at something that's not enjoyable?
So do you think that a lot of times these kinds of vision issues get misdiagnosed as like ADHD or dyslexia or something similar?
Look, I think it's a complex issue that's not easy to answer. So I think there's certainly a small group that do that just have vision problems getting in the way of their learning, where that is the only reason. And they're the group that when you manage the vision problem through an appropriate set of glasses or doing vision therapy, they just take off. And you kind of go, well, it was never a learning problem. It was never a reading problem. It was never dyslexia. They just had a vision problem. And I don't know if you, I like the Wallace and Gromit TVs, the shows, and there was the
I
one
do.
where they were going to the moon and to get some cheese, and they've got the rocket, they've built it, and they're all ready for takeoff, and the rocket's shaking, and they're kind of looking at each other and wondering why the rocket hasn't taken off. And Gromit looks down and takes the handbrake off, and all of a sudden the rocket shoots off. And it's kind of like that with some kids where you get this remarkable change from a fairly simple thing that you've done because they were like that rocket just ready to go, but they had the handbrake on, which was, a simple vision problem.
Mm.
But to take that a little bit further, if you look at the attention deficit populations and the kids who might have dyslexia or reading problems, the research seems to indicate that they are more likely to also have vision problems that are hindering them. So they've got what we like to call a comorbid problem. And any human being deserves to have good vision. So we have a role to play in helping remove the visual barrier to their recovery, even if it's not the primary cause of their diagnosis. So I think it's a really important thing that we're assessing vision across all of those. And the way I look at it, if you've got a reading problem, you are doing more work than everybody else. You are probably someone who needs the removal of a vision problem the most, because you're spending more time and more work on your recovery.